Drums beat in my head. Ottilie eyed the various foods and fancies laid out on the table in front of her. It had been a while since she'd tasted sirah this sweet, or enjoyed much other than salted fish and rye bread. Mending fish nets was just as hard on the hands as the regular ones, but it paid 1/10 of the amount. She took another one of the sweet pastries and savoured the rich taste. Hopefully, there'd be plenty more of this if the plan worked. Ottilie, may I call you that? The Demiro asked. Her mouth was full of pastry, so she nodded. It wasn't needed, however, as the wealthy woman hadn't actually waited for an answer. Your idea. I've discussed it with my fellow Parador Masters. We all agree it's quite extraordinarily clever. We would most definitely want to support you in this prosperous and ambitious endeavour. We can arrange a meeting with the appropriate members of the civil service. They will be able to analyse your idea and turn it into a set of facts and figures the Imperial Senate can understand. It's like a business plan, you see. You'll need that. We'll need that to convince the powers that be to support your idea. The woman paused to allow Ottilie to say something, but one thing she knew about wealthy folks like this was that they didn't like being interrupted, so she just nodded her head in agreement and waited for the Demiro to continue. What we would like to do is offer one small improvement, one little extra element that might be included. It's just an extra option for people to consider. A way to ensure that not just you and the other riggers benefit, but potentially the whole Brass Coast. With our help, and the help of others at Anvil, hopefully, your idea could be a source of prosperity for every freeborn. How does that sound? It sounds too good to be true, thought Ottilie to herself. Clearly the woman thought she was 3 coals short of a hot fire. She kept that thought to herself for now and smiled back at the rich Demiro. I'm listening, was all she said. They might have all the money, but it was Ottilie Imalun Iarigo with the big idea. They needed her more than she needed them, so this had better be good. Overview. The territory of Feroz languishes in the control of the Grendel, suffering under the rule of despotic governor Rahab. It was a price the Empire reluctantly paid to buy peace with the Grendel, buying victory for other nations with Freeborn and Urizeni land. Since then, the Freeborn have become skilled at finding ways to thwart the Grendel, repeatedly tweaking Rahab's nose to snatch victory after another from his vicious jaws. This plan, however, just might be the most audacious scheme yet. It's an astonishing idea, a plan so brilliant, so brazen, it might have come from the mind of Ariga herself. Yet, so simple, a child could conceive of it. Ottilie Imalun Iarigo proposes that the Brass Coast steal the Scorero nets. The Scorero nets are a massive series of poles and nets established along the banks of the Scorero in northernmost Oran-Serai. Years ago, the Freeborn discovered that the river was washing tiny amounts of ilium down from the mountains. Once they realised that a king's ransom was sailing down the river and being swept out to sea, a plan was formed to capture the wealth before it could be lost. Vast nets were built that could be deployed at key points along the length of the river to sieve out precious material before it was lost in the deep waters of the Bay of Katazar. The nets had to be continually repaired and periodically replaced, but in return for such prosperous industry, the nets produced a regular supply of ilium. Rahab quickly moved to take ownership of the Scorero nets once the Grendel seized Feroz. There seems to be little the governor cares about other than extracting as much wealth as physically possible from his prize. Feroz was a prosperous land, but the Scorero nets were the jewel in the crown. The governor turned the offices of the Scorero nets into his palace, allegedly so that he could be as close to the source of the precious metal as possible. That may or may not be true, but the spies are certain of one thing. The ilium from the nets goes directly to Governor Rahab. It's delivered to him in person, and nobody knows what happens to it after that. Maybe he sleeps on a big pile of it, like a dragon in a child's tale. Well, probably not, because the nets don't produce that much ilium, but they are an immense source of wealth, and that's the one thing the Grandel prize more than anything else. Stealing the Scorero. Ottilie Imalun y Irigo knows the Scorero well. She and her family worked the nets in the days when Feroz was free and freeborn, earning a good living for themselves. The Demiro of the Maloon family is said to possess a jewelled headpiece made from 2 rings of ilium. Ottilie is not so fortunate. She fled north when the Brass Coast Assembly urged the freeborn to flee Feroz and has struggled to find work since. In this, she's not alone. There are scores of displaced net riggers who've taken refuge in the Seguran town of Cervado. They've eked out a living, mending nets for fishermen. But as Ottilie says, it's poor work for folk who once stole the stars from the sea. Their plan is expensive, but extraordinarily simple. Cervado is sited at a particularly dangerous set of rapids. The rocks break up the Scorero into an angry froth and are just as eager to shatter the hulls of boats and ships. Whatever the philosophers may say, this is the same river that the Scorero nets are anchored in. The ilium that was once dredged up by the net riggers of Feroz, the same ilium now being dredged by Grandel slaves, must logically pass through Cervado before it hits Feroz. Back when the nets were first established in Feroz, there was talk of instead building nets and traps near Cervado. Some of the locals are still bitter that that plan never came to fruition and claim that politics denied the town the chance to oversee the nets. Archivists suggest that their failure to secure bourse seats had more to do with the incredible danger posed by building along the rapids, which, given how dangerous the Scorero nets are, is saying something indeed. But, suggests Ottilie, why not rebuild the nets on the rapids upstream of Feroz and just steal all the ilium from the Grandel before it reaches them? There's nothing in the peace treaty that covers audaciously recovering ilium from the Scorero after all. And besides, Rahab's already so furious with the Empire, it's doubtful he could get any more annoyed. Still, it can't hurt to try. The Cervado nets. For 200 thrones, the Senate could establish a new ilium bourse seat at Cervado in Segura. The seat would take 3 months to establish and have the standard 5-throne upkeep. Parador masters of the Cervado promised to pay 60 thrones to the Senate if they build the seat and allocate it to the Brass Coast. If built, the Cervado nets will destroy the Scorero nets, denying all the ilium to Governor Rahab. Ottilie has formed an alliance with the Parador masters of Cervado to present their plan together. The idea is to put the net riggers who escaped Feroz to work, creating a new set of nets and traps across the Scorero at Cervado, incorporating the rapids below the town. The materials required are not cheap, and of course the workers will need to be well paid, but the civil service calculate the first ilium would be seen within a few months of putting the nets down. The Senate would need to provide 200 thrones, but it would create a new bourse seat, which would require a 5-throne per season upkeep. The Cervado nets would be slightly less productive than the Scorero nets, providing 4 rings of ilium each season rather than 5. But if work began immediately, the Imperial Senate would be in a position to allocate the new seat at the spring equinox. It would also deny all the ilium to Governor Rahab, making using the Scorero nets useless while the Cervado nets were still intact. There are obvious advantages to a new ilium bourse seat for the Senate. If it were an imperial seat, it could be auctioned to help provide additional treasury funds to help bridge the so-called ilium gap. Yet, predictably, the Parador Masters of Serravado are not backing Ottily's plan out of altruism. They want the Serravado nets to be allocated as a national seat, appointed by tally of the votes by the fleet owners of the Brass Coast. To that end, they declare that if the Senate passes and builds the new nets and allocates the seat to the Brass Coast, they will donate 60 thrones to the Senate Treasury at the same summit the allocation takes place. Oh, and the freeborn egregore has agreed to handle the donation. Of course, any imperial citizen can donate funds to the Treasury, so they also urge their fellow freeborn to put their hands in their own pouches to make donations of their own. Whatever it takes to buy the good grace of the Senate. In this way, the Brass Coast might be able to make up for at least some of the Ilium lost to them, along with the broken shore bounty.